I stepped down from the transport van and nearly lost my footing on the ice. The cold came through my boots right away. It was 22 degrees below zero outside Longyear Bayan, and the wind pushed loose snow across the ice shelf in thin, white lines. The sky was dark except for the faint glow behind the mountains, and the vault entrance sat ahead of me like a concrete wedge driven into the side of the rock. A single amber floodlight hung above it. I pulled my coat tighter and looked back at the van. The driver was already getting ready to leave. I hadn't expected a ceremony or anything, but I'd thought there might be someone to tell me where to stand or what to do with my bags. Instead, the van turned around and drove back toward town. I was alone on the ice shelf with the mountain in front of me. The 6-month contract had seemed like a good idea when I signed it. The Svalbard Global Seed Vault was about as far away from my family as geography allowed. That was what I wanted. Enough of it that nobody would ask about my father or the doctors or the years Terry had spent locked away because of what they called biological instability. There were other reasons to take the job. The pay was good. The work was quiet. Nobody expected a night shift watchman to make conversation, but mostly I wanted to get away. The blast-proof door opened before I reached it. A woman stood inside the entrance wearing a dark thermal uniform buttoned to the throat. She was short and solid with close-cropped gray hair and a wide face lined by the cold. A sidearm rested on her hip. She didn't explain it, and I didn't ask. She didn't offer her hand.
"You're Lloyd,"
she said. "Yes."
"Amelia."
She said it like I was supposed to know who she was. I assumed she was the supervisor I'd been told about. She held out a leather-bound manual. I reached for it, but she didn't release it.
"These are the preservation rules,"
she said.
"They are not suggestions. They are not bureaucratic caution. They are the reason the last Watchman is no longer available to brief you."
The wind moved around us and made a low sound against the concrete. I looked at the manual. The leather was dark and worn at the corners. There were no markings on the cover. It looked less like an employee handbook than something that had been carried through a war. "What happened to him?" I asked. Emilia watched me for a moment.
"You will learn what is required."
Then she turned and walked inside. I followed her through the entrance. The door shut behind me with a heavy mechanical sound, and the cold changed from something moving around my body to something built into the walls. Emilia kept the manual in one hand as she led me down the first corridor. Her boots made almost no sound on the concrete. Mine did. Every step seemed too loud in the narrow passage.
"The first rule,"
she said, holding up one finger.
"do not count the steps in the spiral staircase."
I waited for the rest of the explanation. None came. She raised a second finger.
"If you see a shadow with more than 2 legs, do not shine your light on it."
I looked at her back. She kept walking.
"The third rule, never enter Vault Room 4 during a lunar eclipse."
The corridor sloped downward. I could feel it in my knees, even though the floor looked level.
"The fourth rule, ignore any sound of wind coming from the airlocked vents."
She raised another finger.
"If a seed sprouts in the dry freeze, immediately incinerate it and report a false bloom."
She lowered her hand and finally looked back at me. Her face had the same expression it had when she opened the door. It was hard to tell if she was serious or if this was some kind of test for new employees. I had worked security jobs before. I dealt with threats, liars, and people who thought rules existed for somebody else. None of them had included instructions about shadows with extra legs. "You expect me to follow all of those?" I asked.
"The rules are not suggestions."
That wasn't my question.
"It was the correct answer."
She continued down the corridor. I followed because there wasn't anywhere else to go. The vault was quieter than I'd expected. There were no voices or machinery loud enough to make the place feel occupied. The lights were bright and white, and every surface looked clean enough to eat from. Pipes ran along the ceiling behind metal covers. The air smelled faintly of dust and cold steel. I tried not to think about the spiral staircase. The passage opened onto a lower level marked with a blue sign. B level. Emilia stopped beside a stainless steel trough and a cabinet bolted into the wall. The cabinet had a red biohazard symbol on the front. A steel lock hung beneath the handle. She reached beneath her collar and pulled out a key attached to a lanyard around her neck. "What's in there?" I asked.
An example.
She unlocked the cabinet and opened the door. Cold air came out of it, not the ordinary cold of the hallway. This was sharper and drier, with the smell of old metal and something faintly sweet underneath. Emilia lifted out a clear container sealed with a thick lid. Something pale rested inside. She carried it to the trough and set it beneath the blue-white light. The plant was about 40 centimeters tall. It had no leaves and no flowers. Its body was made of thin, branching growths that were white at the edges and gray toward the center, like bone left outside in bad weather. Then I saw the shape. 2 curved structures rose from a narrow central stalk. Smaller branches connected them at regular spaces. They formed the unmistakable outline of a human ribcage. I stared at it for longer than I meant to. "What is it?"
A false bloom.
"It's a plant?"
That is what it appears to be.
The growths were too exact. The ribs curved away from the center in the same way real ribs did. There was even a narrow gap at the bottom where the bones would have met the stomach. I felt a twinge of disgust. It wasn't strong enough to make me look away, but it stayed in my throat. Emilia watched my face again.
This one was recovered from the previous Watchman's station locker,
she said. I looked at the sealed container. His locker? Yes. What happened to him?
It was found on sea level.
She lifted the container and returned it to the cabinet.
Fused into the permafrost of the vault wall. His skin had hardened into thick gray bark before he died.
I didn't say anything. The cabinet door closed with a metal clang. Emilia locked it and put the key back beneath her collar. Then she reached to her belt and removed another key. This one was longer and heavier. A black plastic tag hung from the ring. She held it out to me. I took it. The metal was cold enough to hurt my fingers through my gloves.
Master key,
she said.
All levels.
I looked down at it. There were no numbers on the tag. Just a small white mark that had been scratched into the plastic.
Follow the rules, and you will be bored for 6 months,
Emilia said.
Deviate, and you will become an administrative problem I would prefer not to manage.
She turned away before I could answer. Wait. She stopped but didn't face me.
The manual.
Emilia looked over her shoulder. For the first time, I saw something change in her expression. It wasn't concern. It was more like impatience. She walked back and placed the leather-bound book in my other hand.
Read it before you begin the patrol.
Then she turned and walked down the corridor. I watched her go until the sound of her boots disappeared. The lights hummed overhead. The biohazard cabinet was locked behind me. I stood alone on B level holding the master key, the leather manual open in my other hand. For the next 2 hours, I read the manual and walked the B-level corridor. The rules were written in plain language, but that didn't make them easier to accept. Do not count the steps. Do not shine a light on anything with more than 2 legs. Never enter Vault Room 4 during a lunar eclipse. I kept coming back to the 3rd rule. The first circuit was supposed to be routine. The manual said to check each sealed door and record the condition of the locks on the clipboard provided at the station. It didn't say what to do if the locks were damaged. It didn't say what to do if a door was open. It only said to report any irregularity and wait for further instruction. I carried the clipboard in one hand and the master key in the other. The corridor ran farther than I expected. Rows of steel doors stood along both walls, each one set into the concrete with no windows or handles on the inside. Condensation covered parts of the walls and gathered in small lines beneath the overhead pipes. My breath showed in front of me, even though the cryo systems were supposed to keep the air stable. The only sound was the mechanical hum of the freezers cycling somewhere behind the walls. I stopped at each door and wrote down the number, the lock condition, and the time. Amelia had promised it would be boring. Instead, I kept expecting something to move at the edge of the light. Nothing did. When I reached the far end of the corridor, I turned around and started back. That was when I saw the vial. It was lying in the middle of the floor, not beside one of the doors, not beneath a shelf or a cart. There wasn't anything near it that could have held it. I stopped a few feet away. The vial was small enough to fit in my palm. Its glass looked clean and unbroken, and the seal was still fixed around the top. I looked above it at the concrete ceiling. There was no rack there, no pipe, nothing that might have dropped it. I crouched down. Something pale yellowish white rested inside the glass. At first I thought it was a piece of bone. It looked like a human molar. The top was broad and uneven. Several narrow root prongs extended from the bottom and pressed against the inside of the vial. It was the size of a real tooth, but there was no enamel shine to it. The surface looked dry and faintly porous. I didn't touch it right away. The manual didn't have a rule about loose vials in the corridor. It had several pages on contamination, though, and most of those instructions ended with the same words: do not handle. I looked down the empty corridor. The cryosystems hummed behind the walls. The vial sat on the concrete. I reached out and picked it up. The glass was warm. Not warm like it had been sitting beside a machine. Warm like it had been held in someone's hand. The shaking started. My back arched and my teeth slammed together. The corridor disappeared. I saw the mountain outside the vault split open from top to bottom, the rock pulling apart into a jagged mouth. Rows of teeth filled the opening. They were long and white and packed close together, and the dark space behind them seemed to go down farther than the mountain itself. I tried to breathe but couldn't. Something flashed behind my eyes. A small paper label was fixed inside the vial. The letters were printed in thick black blocks. Lloyd Olson. The vision ended all at once. The vial fell from my hand and struck the floor. I expected it to shatter, but it bounced once and rolled against the base of the wall. I dropped to my knees. My arms were locked against my sides. Every muscle in my body tightened and released in waves. I could hear my own breathing and the steady hum of the machines. The corridor stayed empty around me. After a while, I was able to put one hand on the floor. The concrete felt cold. My fingers shook against it. I stayed there until the shaking stopped. The lights went red. They dropped into emergency lighting as the white strips overhead dimmed and the red lamps along the walls came on. Somewhere behind the doors, the cryosystems changed pitch. The hum lowered by one step and then held there. I looked at my watch. I already knew what night it was. A sound came from the end of the corridor. It was wet and rhythmic. Something grinding and compressing in sequence with a pause between each movement. It sounded like a machine trying to work through something that didn't belong inside it. Then it happened again. I looked toward the door marked Vault Room 4. The third rule came back to me. There was a lunar eclipse tonight. The date was in the manual. The dark shape of the moon had been mentioned on the weather display near the entrance. I checked my watch again anyway. The sound came from behind the door. I stood up and took the master key from the floor where I had dropped it. My hands were still unsteady, but I could hold the key. I inserted the key. The lock opened with a heavy click. The door moved inward. Metal shelving lined the walls, and seed trays were stacked in orderly rows. Red emergency light came through the doorway and spread across the floor. The glass was everywhere. A whole row of vials had shattered from the inside. The pieces lay in a broken line beneath the shelving. Some of the metal trays had been knocked sideways. Clear liquid had dried in thin streaks across the concrete. The seeds were gone. I stepped inside and looked down at the fragments. There were no footprints. Nothing had been dragged across the floor. The shattered vials were empty except for a few pale scraps clinging to the broken glass. The grinding sound had stopped. A vine grew from a crack in the back corner. It was thick as a garden hose and dark green beneath the red light. It had pushed through the concrete and spread across the floor toward the mainframe terminal mounted on the wall. The vine ended at the Ethernet port. Its leading tendril had shaped itself into a narrow plug. It fit the port exactly and disappeared inside it. The status lights on the terminal blinked one after another. Green, amber, green. Then all three went dark before starting again. I stood there and watched them. It was sending something or receiving it. I didn't know which, and the manual didn't offer a procedure for either possibility. I backed out of the room and went to the equipment locker. The portable industrial incinerator was stored behind the door with the other false bloom supplies. It was a handheld unit with a thick grip and a short heat nozzle. I had seen it earlier during the orientation, but Amelia had only said it was for disposal. I carried it back into Vault Room 4. The incinerator came alive with a low electric whine. A blue-white glow appeared inside the nozzle. I aimed it at the vine and pressed the trigger. The heat struck the green surface. The plant didn't shrivel. Red liquid welled up where the nozzle touched it. It ran down the side of the vine and collected on the floor in a bright, steaming line. I pulled the incinerator back. The liquid was blood. It was warm enough to give off a thin vapor in the cold room. The vine didn't retract. The intercom crackled above the mainframe. I turned toward it. Static filled the room. Then a voice came through, calm and unhurried, with the faint, wet distance of someone speaking from far away. I hadn't heard that voice in 11 years. "Lloyd, put the fire down. You're going to hurt something that doesn't deserve it. Come down further. Come all the way down." The intercom clicked off. My father's voice was gone from the intercom. For the next 20 minutes, I stayed away from Vault Room 4. I went back to the surface monitoring station and sat in front of the CCTV screens. The intercom was silent, but I kept expecting my father's voice to come through again. I didn't want to hear it. I also didn't want to leave the room and find out that it had followed me. The monitoring station was small and crowded with equipment. 4 screens showed the main airlock from different angles, and 2 more showed the concrete approach outside. The vault entrance was lit by a pair of yellow floodlights. Beyond them was the ice shelf and the dark mountain. Then one of the exterior cameras caught my attention. 3 figures stood in the snow near the outer perimeter. They were about 30 meters from the main airlock. They weren't moving. At first I thought they were rocks or equipment left behind by one of the transport crews, but the camera adjusted its focus and showed me the shapes of their bodies. They were people. I checked the other cameras. The figures appeared on 2 of them. 3 men standing shoulder to shoulder in the snow with their backs turned slightly toward the vault. Frost had formed across their coats and around their boots. They looked as if they had been placed there and forgotten. I turned to the manual beside me. The lockdown rule was clear. Remain inside until Amelia released the airlock. Do not open the outer door for any person or object during an active containment event. I had already broken the rules once that night. The difference was that I'd done it inside the vault. This time I would have to open the door and walk out into the cold. I picked up the radio. "Amelia," I said, "there are people outside." The radio gave me static. I waited for her answer, but none came. But they were lying in the snow outside the vault, and I knew what the cold would do to them. I left the radio on the desk and went to the airlock controls. The first door opened with a heavy mechanical sound. Cold air pushed into the intake room before the inner door sealed behind me. I stepped into the narrow space and waited for the warning light to change. It took longer than I expected. When the outer door finally opened, the wind struck me hard enough to make me step back. Snow blew across the concrete apron and hit my face. I lowered my head and walked toward the three figures. The cold was worse outside than it had been when I arrived. It went through my gloves and made my fingers hurt almost at once. My breath froze against the front of my mask. I could barely see the men through the blowing snow. The closest one was lying on his side. I grabbed him beneath the arms and pulled. His coat scraped across the ice and the weight of his body made my back ache. He didn't help me. His boots caught against the uneven surface until I dragged him over the concrete and into the airlock. I went back for the second man. He was heavier than the first and had fallen face down. Frost covered the back of his coat in a pale layer. I rolled him over and saw that his face was gray beneath the ice. I pulled him toward the door one short distance at a time. The third man was the tallest. He was lying several meters away from the others with one arm bent beneath his chest. A plastic badge hung from his coat. The letters were partly hidden by frost, but I could make out the words Origin Biotech Research Division. I pulled him last. By then, my legs were shaking from the cold and effort. The man's body felt completely rigid. His head struck the concrete once as I dragged him through the outer door. I stopped to check his face. He didn't move. The airlock doors closed behind me. I got all three men into the intake room and laid them on the floor beneath the heating vents. The room was warmer than the corridor, but it still felt cold after being outside. I pulled off my gloves and flexed my fingers. They were pale and stiff. The men didn't move. I looked toward the inner door. "Come on," I said, though none of them could hear me. The door opened a few minutes later. Amelia stepped into the intake room wearing her full security uniform. Her silver hair was pinned flat against the back of her head, and her sidearm rested on her left hip. She looked at the three bodies on the floor, and then at me.
You brought them in?
It wasn't a question. They would have died.
They are infiltrators.
She said the word as if it explained everything. "They're frozen," I said. "They need medical help."
They came for the origin seed. Whatever they told you or will tell you is designed to get you to open the lower levels.
She didn't move toward them. She didn't kneel down or check for a pulse. She stood with her hands at her sides and looked at the bodies as if they were damaged equipment. I felt anger then. It was different from the disgust I'd felt when I saw the false bloom. "You're not even going to help them."
No.
"They could still be alive."
They are infiltrators.
That doesn't answer the question.
It is the answer.
I looked at the tallest man. The badge on his chest had a strip of frost across the lower half. I reached over and brushed it away with my thumb. The name was printed beneath the company information. Dr. Elijah Sanders. I knew the vault had a biometric scanner at the intake station. It was mounted beside the decontamination cabinet and used to verify staff and approved visitors. I got to my feet and removed it from its charging cradle. Amelia watched me.
Put that down.
"I'm checking his identification."
That is not your authority.
I wasn't hired to ask questions about the rules. I was hired to follow them.
You are not following them now.
I brought the scanner over to the man and held it above the badge. The screen lit up and read the chip. A progress bar moved across the display. Amelia turned slightly toward the door. The scanner beeped. The record appeared in red text. Elijah Sanders, born April 3rd, 1901. Declared deceased, May 12th, 1945. I read it twice. The photo on the screen showed the same narrow face lying beneath the frost, the same sharp nose, the same hollow cheeks. He looked older in the photograph, but not by much. The badge photo could have been taken yesterday. "Amelia," I said. She didn't answer. This man was declared dead in 1945.
I know.
I looked at her. "You knew?"
I know what the scanner reported.
"That isn't what I asked." She turned her head toward me. Her expression hadn't changed.
You will stop asking questions that have no operational value.
The heat had begun to work on the bodies. Frost melted from their clothing and ran onto the floor in thin lines. The two men nearest the wall remained still. One had a dark patch spreading beneath his shoulder. The other's mouth hung open slightly, but there was no breath coming from it. Elijah's face was clearing. The ice around his eyes thinned first. I saw the skin beneath it and then the eyes themselves. Something green moved down his cheeks. I mistook it for melted water reflecting the light. Then the substance gathered beneath his eyelids and slipped from the corners of his eyes in slow, thick lines. It was darker than the green tracery under my own skin and had the heavy look of sap. His eyes were dry. The green substance was coming from somewhere behind them. I took one step back. His hand shot out and closed around my forearm. The grip was hard enough to hurt. I tried to pull away, but his fingers didn't move. He didn't sit up. His body stayed flat on the floor while his head turned toward me. His eyes opened. They were dark green from edge to edge. There was no white showing anywhere. It sounded like two voices speaking at nearly the same time, one half a beat behind the other.
The vault was never built to save the future. Every seed in this mountain is a fragment of a single organism. The vault is a prison, the walls are the cage, the rules are the locks, and you are always the key.
He looked directly at me when he said the last part. I stopped trying to pull away. His grip loosened. Amelia drew her sidearm. The shot was loud in the intake room. Elijah's hand fell from my arm, and his body jerked once against the floor. Then it went still. A thin line of green sap continued down from one eye and reached the concrete. Amelia holstered her sidearm.
Come with me now. There are things below this level you need to see before you make any more unilateral decisions.
I followed her because she was already walking away. The three men remained on the floor behind us. Elijah's blood was still running over the concrete, and I could feel the ache in my forearm where his hand had closed around it. Amelia didn't look back at either of them. She crossed the intake room and opened the inner door. The corridor beyond was empty. I expected her to take me toward the monitoring station or back down to B level. Instead, she turned toward the lower passage that connected the main levels. We passed B level first, then C level. The doors and equipment looked the same as they had earlier, but I noticed more of the small details this time. Frost along the edges of the walls, black cables disappearing beneath the floor, a drain set into the concrete with a metal cover that had been scratched from the inside. Amelia kept moving. "Where are we going?" I asked.
You will see.
That's not an answer.
It is sufficient.
She stopped at the end of the sea-level corridor. There was a steel door set into the wall where I was certain there hadn't been one before. It had no number or warning sign. A small black plate sat beside the frame. Amelia took the lanyard from beneath her collar. The key for the biohazard cabinet hung there with another key I hadn't seen before. It was longer and darker, with a jagged tooth pattern cut into the end. She pressed her palm against the black plate. A green light came on. There was a click inside the wall. Then she put the key into the lock and turned it. The door opened inward. I looked at the scanner beside the frame. That door isn't on the maps.
The maps do not include this level.
You knew this was here.
I've been here before.
She stepped through. I followed her into a narrow stairwell. The steps were cut directly into the permafrost. They were uneven and pale beneath the light from Amelia's torch, with walls that looked more like packed snow than stone. Water had frozen in thin lines along the edges. The air was colder than it had been above, and the temperature dropped every time we reached another landing. I kept one hand against the wall as I went down. The surface was hard enough to hold my weight, but it didn't feel solid. There were darker shapes beneath the ice, long lines that ran beside the stairs and disappeared below the next landing. At first I thought they were cracks. Then one of them moved. It was only a small shift, a tightening under the frozen surface. I stopped and looked closer. Something like a root was buried in the wall. It was pale and narrow, with smaller strands wrapped around it in a pattern I didn't understand. A faint green light pulsed near the center. Once, Then again.
Keep moving.
Amelia said. I looked at her. What is that?
Root structure.
That doesn't answer what it's doing in the wall. She had already started down the next flight. The steps continued far below the lower levels. I lost track of the landings almost immediately. Cold seeped through my boots into my legs. My hands had begun to shake by the time Amelia stopped at the bottom. There was no door there. The stairwell opened into darkness. I turned on my headlamp. The beam reached across a small part of the space in front of me and disappeared into the distance. Amelia raised her torch and swept it across the walls. The cavern was enormous. The ceiling was so high that the light didn't reach it. The darkness above us looked like another night sky without stars. The walls curved away on both sides, and the floor continued farther than I could see. The cavern was vast, with no lights, seats, or signs that anyone had ever meant for people to stand there. The cold was immediate. It had none of the controlled quality of the upper levels. It sat in the air and pressed against my face. I moved my headlamp across the nearest wall. Roots covered it from floor to ceiling. They were thick and tangled together, packed so tightly that they looked like metal bars inside concrete. Some were as wide as my arm, others were thin as wires and ran between them in long, twisting lines. Pale green light showed at the places where the roots crossed or joined. I felt sick. They weren't growing randomly. The roots formed paired strands. They twisted around each other and separated again. Small branches connected them at regular intervals. Under the white beam of my headlamp, the pattern became clear. They were shaped like a double helix. I turned toward the center of the cavern. A tree grew through the floor. Its trunk was at least 3 meters across and rose straight into the dark above us. I couldn't see where it ended. The bark was the color of old iron, dark and rough with deep vertical grooves. It looked dead from a distance, but the green light beneath the bark gave it a slow and steady pulse. The roots spread out from its base across the floor. They covered the cavern in widening patterns. Some ran toward the walls, others disappeared beneath the ice. I saw the men near the outer edge of the roots. They were standing. The 3 bodies from the intake room stood several meters apart with their backs toward the cavern wall. Frost still covered parts of their clothing. Their eyes were open, and their chests moved with slow breaths. Elijah stood closest to me. The bullet wound was visible beneath his coat. A dark hole marked the place where Amelia had shot him. There was no blood on the floor around his feet. Roots had grown through his clothing at both knees and one shoulder. Another narrow strand entered the base of his skull and disappeared beneath the skin of his neck. His face was still the same sharp face I had seen upstairs, but the skin around the roots had changed. It was gray and ridged. Bark had spread across the insertion points. It covered the sides of his neck and ran beneath his collar in hard raised lines. The same texture had formed around his joints. His fingers were stiff, with thin green strands visible beneath the skin. The other 2 men had been changed in the same way. One stood with roots through his elbows and the back of his head. The other had them running into his hips and jaw. None of them reacted to us. They only breathed and stared into the dark. "They're alive," I said.
Yes.
"What is it doing to them?" Amelia looked at Elijah. Her face was calm as she watched him.
This is what they wanted. They came here to be absorbed. Infiltrators always tell themselves they are liberating it. They are volunteering.
I looked at the roots in Elijah's neck. One of them tightened beneath the skin. His head tilted slightly to the side. They didn't know this would happen.
They knew enough.
They thought they were going to control it?
They thought they were going to release it.
That's not the same thing.
No.
The tree gave off a low vibration. I felt it through the soles of my boots. The sound traveled through the floor and into my legs. It was like the hum of the cryo systems upstairs, but deeper and slower. I turned toward Amelia. "How long has the tree been here?" She kept watching the trunk.
Longer than the island has had a name.
the roots shifted across the floor. The hum deepened in pitch, and the faint green light at the root nodes brightened as, from the mouths of all three absorbed men simultaneously, a voice began to speak. The sound came from all three men at once. Their mouths opened together, but the voices weren't perfectly matched. One was slightly higher than the others, another dragged behind by half a second. It made the words sound stretched across the cavern, as if the tree were speaking through three damaged radios. "We are the mother of memory." The green light beneath the bark brightened. I looked at the three men. None of them appeared to be choosing to speak. Their faces stayed fixed and empty, while their mouths moved in the same slow rhythm. The voice continued. "Your family has served here since the Viking settlements. The first cairns were built over the root extensions. The Norsemen believed they were marking the dead. They were tending the boundary." I looked at Amelia. She didn't correct it. She didn't even seem surprised. The tree had been beneath the mountain before the vault existed. The modern building had been placed over the same site. The roots had been here first, running through the permafrost and under the stones left by people who had lived on the island 1,000 years ago. "You carry the oldest contract on this earth, Lloyd. It is written in your genome." The word contract stayed in the cavern after the voice stopped saying it. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew it wasn't a contract I had signed. The root network moved under my boots. A thin tendril pushed out of the floor a few feet in front of me. It was pale and wet, no thicker than a piece of wire. It lifted itself from the ice and bent toward my leg. I stepped back. "There is a correction available to you," the mother of memory said. "The decay you fear can be cured." I felt my hands tighten at my sides. My father's illness had started. At first, it had been small things, forgotten appointments, missed meals, questions he asked twice in the same conversation. Then he stopped sleeping and began hearing voices through the walls. The doctors had called it inherited. They had said there was no way to know if I would develop it too. I had taken the night job in the Arctic. The voice spoke again. "You fled north to outrun the pattern. It followed you here." The tendril slid across the floor. Its tip touched the front of my boot. I moved away from it so quickly that my heel struck one of the roots behind me. The impact knocked me off balance. I caught myself against the cavern wall and felt a faint vibration move through the ice. "The cure is integration," the mother of memory said. "Your individual death will be replaced by participation in 10,000 years of continuous biological memory." The three men turned their heads toward me. "Your father is already here. He did not fight it. He was not lost. He came home." I stared at them. My father had been institutionalized for years. The last time I saw him, he had been sitting beside a window with both hands folded in his lap. He hadn't known where he was. He had looked directly at me and called me by the name of someone who had been dead for a long time. Now the tree was telling me he was under the mountain. The root touched my boot again. I kicked it away. It recoiled across the floor and curled around itself. The men did not react. The green light in the roots continued to pulse. I turned from the tree and moved along the cavern wall. Amelia watched me but didn't try to stop me. There was a section of steel set into the wall several meters away. I hadn't noticed it when we entered. It looked like a utility door for a storage room or maintenance office. I reached it and pushed. The door opened inward. A small office had been built into the side of the cavern. It was only slightly warmer. A desk stood beneath a concrete shelf. A lamp rested on a battery unit beside it, throwing a yellow circle across the papers. There was no computer and no radio. The only sound came from the tree vibrating through the wall. A large ledger sat in the middle of the desk. Its cover was cracked and dark with age. The corners had been worn smooth from use. I pulled it toward me and opened it. The most recent pages were written in Amelia's hand. I knew the writing from the patrol logs. Her letters were narrow and even, with no wasted marks. Every line sat straight across the page. Dates filled one column, names filled another. The final column held short notes that looked more like decisions than records. I turned the page. The handwriting changed. Some entries were neat and careful. Others had been written with a thick pen that had left marks on the pages beneath it. The ink changed from black to brown, and then to a faded blue. The book had been added to for centuries. I followed the family column down the page. The first name I recognized was mine, Lloyd Olson. It sat at the end of a line that stretched backward across several pages. The entries became older as I moved left. The last one was written in a script I couldn't read at first. The letters were long and angled, cut into the margin beside a date that had been copied more than once. The name was still Olson. I put one hand flat on the desk. Beneath the names were descriptions of what had happened to each person. The word mad appeared beside several of them. Others were marked committed or institutionalized. The entries were written as if those were the same kind of event. My father's name was there. The line beside it read, "Transitioned, accepted biological integration." I read it again. Then I found the same notation beside the others. The entries included relatives who had been sent away or stopped speaking clearly, and relatives whose families had called them sick, dangerous, or no longer themselves. They hadn't all been suffering from an illness. Something in them had been reactivated. The tree had been waiting for the part of their blood that belonged to it. When the change became strong enough, they came here. The plain ink entries were labeled gardeners. I turned more pages and traced the column with my finger. The farther back I went, the more names appeared. The dates covered the entire history of the family as far as the book went. The entries didn't stop at the edge of the modern vault. They continued through older settlements and older records. Then I saw the red ink. The first red entry was halfway down a page. The notation was short. Pruned, refused integration, risk of disclosure. A date followed it, then a cause of death, natural causes. The next red line said accident, another said exposure. I kept turning pages. The red entries appeared at regular intervals through the family column. Some were separated by decades, others were only a few years apart. Each one had a date and a reason that could have been accepted by anyone reading a normal family record. A fall, a drowning, a fire, a failure of the heart, pruner. Emilia had said she had been here before. She had carried a sidearm into the intake room and shot Elijah without hesitation. She had watched the tree take the other two men and never once looked away. I counted the red marks in the Olson line. There were 7. I closed the ledger. For a few seconds, I kept my hand on the cover. The leather was cold beneath my palm. Outside the office, the tree gave off another deep vibration, and the lamp on the battery unit flickered once. I faced the door. Emilia stepped into the office. Her sidearm was visible at her hip, but she hadn't drawn it.
You've read enough to make this harder than it needs to be.
I looked at Emilia. She was standing in the doorway with one hand resting near her sidearm.
You have been reading the wrong part of the ledger,
she said.
The names are clear enough.
They are not names. They are outcomes. She stepped farther into the office and looked toward the cavern. The tree's vibration came through the wall behind her. It made the papers on the desk shift slightly, though there was no wind in the room.
I have been pruner for 41 years,
she said.
The mandate was established when the modern vault was built over this site. I prevent uncontrolled integration events. I remove gardener line members who refuse when the tree calls them.
I looked down at the ledger. The red marks ran through the family line in a pattern that was too regular to be chance. You killed them.
Yes. They were refusing integration,
she continued.
If the refusal reaches the outside world, the vault loses its legitimacy. The tree becomes exposed to interests that would weaponize it.
The governments that store seeds here.
Governments, corporations, military institutions. Anyone who believes a biological system can be controlled because it has been placed inside a building.
I thought about the sealed rooms above us. Instead, it had been built over something that wanted to change life.
I took no pleasure in any red entry in that ledger.
Amelia said.
But the alternative is worse than you can calculate right now.
Before I could answer, the wall split open. The first root came through the plaster beside the desk. It punched into the room, threw dust across the lamp, and sent a crack up toward the ceiling. A second broke through behind Amelia. The third came through the wall near the door. They moved fast. One wrapped around Amelia's ankle. Another caught her calf. The roots tightened and pulled her backward before she could reach the doorway. She fired her sidearm at the one around her leg. The shot filled the office with white light and smoke. Red fluid burst from the root. It recoiled against the wall, twisting like a severed cable. Two more took its place. Amelia fired again. The second root split open and sprayed the floor. She didn't scream. Her face stayed fixed as the roots pulled her lower body into the broken wall.
It needs a sacrifice to initiate the bloom,
she said. A root locked around her other leg and dragged her down to one knee.
It has been using me as the pruner, because it always intended me as the sacrifice at the end. I have known this for 20 years.
The roots climbed higher. They wrapped around her hips and pulled her toward the opening. Her shoulder struck the concrete with a dull sound. She fired twice more, but the roots were already replacing themselves as fast as she cut them. The office wall began to move. It wasn't just the roots. The concrete around them flexed and broke apart in small sections. Green light appeared beneath the surface, spreading through the cracks like light under ice. The voice came from inside the wall. It was no longer coming through the three men in the cavern. It spoke directly beside me, close enough that I felt the sound against my teeth.
The bloom will propagate through the vault.
Amelia fired again. The shot missed and struck the wall.
Every packet,
the voice continued.
Every shelf, every level, the seeds will carry the origin code.
The tree's vibration deepened.
When they leave this place and are planted, the code will enter their offspring. Everything touched by them will begin to return to the base template.
I looked past Amelia toward the cavern. The roots covered the floor in widening lines. The three absorbed men stood near the edge of the darkness with their backs against the wall. Every country that had sent seeds here would eventually take them home. They had built the vault as an insurance policy, but the insurance would be carrying the infection back to every place on Earth.
It will be a return,
the voice said.
A correction.
Amelia had been pulled halfway through the wall. The roots were wrapped around her waist now. One arm remained outside, and she used it to hold the sidearm against the nearest root. She turned her head toward me.
The incinerator is in the corridor where you left it.
I looked toward the door. The portable industrial incinerator stood outside the office near the stairwell.
The central root,
she said.
The taproot at the base of the trunk is the one that matters. Burn that, and the bloom cannot initiate.
A root tightened around her chest.
You will not come out of it cleanly. It will put everything it has into you when it goes.
I didn't ask what she meant. I was already moving. I went through the doorway and found the incinerator beside the wall where I'd left it. The machine was heavy and had a thick hose attached to the front. Its handle was cold beneath my gloves. I pulled it free and carried it toward the cavern. Behind me, Amelia fired once more. Then the office wall closed over the sound. The cavern was darker than it had been before. Green light ran through the root system and gathered around the base of the tree. The taproot rose from the floor beneath the trunk. It was thicker than the others and covered in rough black bark. I carried the incinerator across the cavern. The three men turned their faces toward me as I approached. Elijah stood in the middle. His eyes were open, but his face showed nothing. Roots held his knees and shoulders. A narrow strand disappeared into the back of his neck. The mother of memory spoke through all three mouths.
You will lose yourself.
I kept walking.
The memory transfer at full capacity will break the vessels in your eyes and the thermal regulation of your body. You will carry 10,000 years of botanical consciousness, and nothing will ever be warm again.
The hose shook in my hands. I lowered the machine beside the trunk and crouched near the taproot. Is that a cure you prefer to mine? I positioned the nozzle an inch from the wood. I could still feel the cold in the cavern. It pressed against my face and entered through the seams in my gloves. My fingers had started to go numb. I knew what the voice had promised to take from me. My father had spoken through the intercom upstairs. The ledger had shown me where he belonged. The tree had been calling him and everyone else in the family back to this place. I looked at Elijah. It's mine to decide, I said. I pulled the trigger. The taproot ignited at once. Fire spread through the bark in a bright line and then divided into dozens of smaller lines. It raced along the floor, too fast for burning wood. The roots lit up one after another, carrying the flames toward the cavern walls. The trunk caught next. Fire climbed it in a single pillar and vanished into the darkness above. The tree gave off a sound. It arrived inside my skull as pressure. Then the memory came through. 10,000 years entered me in less than a second. I saw roots pushing through frozen ground. I saw seeds opening in wet soil. I felt the deaths of forests and the growth that followed them. There were winters that lasted for generations, and seas that moved across land where mountains had stood. I felt animals changing and disappearing. I felt the slow spread of the tree beneath the island. It wasn't a collection of memories. It was one memory with no beginning. The pressure increased. Pressure burst behind my eyes. I felt warmth run down my face. My vision filled with green and white. My body stopped feeling like a body. Every nerve carried the same message at once. The three men dropped as the roots released them. Elijah struck the floor on his side. The other two fell near the rock face. None of them made a sound. I tried to stay upright, but my legs stopped working. I hit the floor face first. The impact should have hurt. I barely noticed it. The tree burned above me. The fire moved through the trunk and into the branches. Green light flickered beneath the bark. The cavern shook as roots broke apart under the floor. My chest tightened. I couldn't draw a full breath. The memory kept coming. I saw the vault from beneath the mountain. I saw the first stone cairns built over the roots. I saw people kneeling in the snow with their hands pressed against the ground. I saw the same people leave and return with others. I saw the family line repeating through the ledger, then the images broke apart. My eyes were burning. My body was colder than it had ever been. I couldn't feel my hands or feet. I couldn't tell whether they were still attached to me. The fire began to weaken. The central root blackened and collapsed inward. The pillar above it thinned until it was only a narrow column of flame. The tree gave one final pulse beneath the bark. Then the burning stopped. I stayed face down on the floor for several seconds. I lifted my head slowly and opened my eyes. The emergency light caught the irises. They were solid, vivid green. My original eye color was gone. I placed both palms against the floor, but the cold did not reach them. I pushed myself up from the cavern floor. My arms shook when I tried to stand. The fire had stopped, but the tree was still there. Its trunk was black from the base to as far as I could see. The outer roots had collapsed into brittle shapes across the ice. Deep beneath the floor, something gave off a faint green pulse. It happened only once every several minutes. The light came through the cracks in the permafrost and then disappeared again. The tree had burned before. It had burned in winters that lasted for generations, and in fires set by people who had forgotten why they were there. It had never been destroyed. Emilia lay a few meters away. The roots had released her when the fire reached the central system. She was alive, but both of her legs were damaged. Bark-textured growth covered her boots and had spread up her calves. One section had broken through the fabric of her uniform and formed a hard ridge beneath her skin. She tried to move one leg and stopped. "You cannot stand," I said.
I am aware.
Her voice was still even. She examined the damage as if it were a broken piece of equipment. I went over and knelt beside her. The cavern had become quieter, but I could still hear the three men breathing near the far wall. They were alive. The roots had pulled back from their bodies, but their skin and joints had not returned to what they had been. I had no idea what to do with them. Amelia put one hand inside her jacket. For a moment, I thought she was reaching for the sidearm. Then she pulled out a pair of iron shears. They were heavy and dark with age. The handles had been worn smooth from years of use. The blades were thick enough to cut through a branch, though I didn't think they had been made for branches. They looked older than the vault and older than the ledger. The same age as the first entries written beside the Olsen name. She held them out to me.
These are the pruner's tool,
she said.
not the gun. The gun was mine, a modern convenience. These are the office.
I took the shears. The iron was colder than the cavern. It pulled the heat out of my gloves and seemed to settle into my hands. I could feel a faint vibration inside the metal, though it might have been coming from the floor. She watched me close my fingers around the handles.
The rules you were given exist to keep the vault staff from waking it further.
She said.
The bloom is stopped, but the seeds upstairs still carry the origin code in trace amounts. Anything that tries to take them off the island tries to take the prison bars home. That is what you watch for now.
I looked at the burned tree. The bloom can start again.
Yes.
Even after this?
It will not start tonight.
She closed her eyes. I waited for her to say something else. She didn't. Her face stayed still while the light pulsed far below us. I put the shears inside my coat and stood. The climb back to the upper levels was slow. The cold no longer reached me the way it had before. I could stand on the ice without feeling it through my boots. My hands were numb, but there was no pain in them. The stairwell walls were covered with frost and dead roots. Some of the strands had collapsed into the permafrost. Others remained in place like dark wires beneath the surface. I passed the three men on the way out. They were still breathing. Elijah's eyes followed me for part of the climb, but his head didn't move. The bark around his neck had hardened into a raised ring. Nothing in his expression showed that he understood what had happened. I left them in the cavern. The upper levels were empty. I moved through C level and then B level without stopping. The lights above the corridor flickered as I passed beneath them. The vault smelled of smoke now, mixed with cold metal and something wet that had come up from below. When I reached the surface monitoring station, the room looked almost the same as it had earlier. The equipment was still running. The airlock cameras showed the concrete approach outside. Snow moved through the yellow light, blowing sideways across the entrance. The radio on the desk remained silent. The radar screen had changed. There were 17 contacts moving together in an organized formation. They were coming in on a northwest bearing toward Svalbard, and they were moving faster than the regular shipping traffic I had seen on the display before. I enlarged the image and checked the signatures. The vessels were military-grade icebreakers. Their size and speed matched the class used by private defense contractors. They were still far out, but they were coming toward the coast. I checked the clock. It was 4:20 in the morning. The communications log showed a message sent 6 hours earlier. It had arrived before my shift started and had been routed to the vault's administrative address. The sender was Terrigan Corporation. The message read, "Pursuant to our acquisition of the Norwegian Seed Authority's interest, we will be sending a recovery team to collect all viable seed stock for the Ares terraforming initiative. Estimated arrival, 6 o'clock. I read it twice. Then I looked back at the radar screen. The 17 contacts were still moving toward us. The company believed it had purchased access to the seed stock. It had sent a recovery team to collect the origin stock. I opened the Vault Archive database. The records appeared on the screen in rows of names and codes. The entire tree was inside me now. I knew what the origin seeds contained because I had felt the system moving through frozen ground and wet soil. I knew what happened when the code entered a living body. The seeds would not terraform another planet. They would consume it. The origin code would begin at the cellular level. It would rewrite whatever biological material it found and build a new root memory from the remains. The change would spread through every organism it could reach. Mars seeded with origin stock would not become habitable for humans. It would become a second tree. I stood in front of the monitors with the iron shears in one hand. The metal was cold against my palm. Then I remembered the entry tunnel. The structural charges had been installed for an emergency collapse. I had seen the controls earlier, though I hadn't understood why the system required the master key. The key was still on me. The charges were keyed to it. The structural charges were for an emergency collapse. I spent the next 2 hours making sure I wouldn't need them for anything else. The emergency radio was still on the desk. I opened the broadcast channel and checked the frequency twice. It was monitored by the Norwegian Coast Guard station at Longyearbyen. If the message reached them, they would hear it. If it didn't, I had no other option. I pressed the record switch. This is the Svalbard Global Seed Vault transmitting emergency status. This facility is under immediate biological quarantine. All approaches to the island within 12 nautical miles are restricted under International Arctic Treaty Article 9, Biological Emergency Protocol. Svalbard is designated a permanent dead zone. This transmission will continue until acknowledged. Do not approach. Do not attempt entry. The material inside this facility is not what you believe it to be. I listened to the recording once. My name wasn't in it. I didn't sign the message or explain who I was. I set the transmission to repeat and pressed transmit. The radio began playing the message back through the small speaker. My voice sounded flat and distant. It was the same voice I used when reading patrol reports or reporting a damaged lock. The message repeated while I walked out of the station. I took the manual with me. The cover had been bent near the spine, and some of the pages were damp from the cavern, but the rules were still readable. I kept the manual open while I held the master key in my other hand. The B-level corridor was empty. The sealed doors stood where they had always stood. Frost traced the edges of the walls. The lights hummed overhead, and the air smelled of smoke now. It had worked its way up from the lower levels and mixed with the usual smell of concrete and cold metal. I stopped outside Vault Room 4. The vine inside had gone limp. Its surface was brown and dry, and it had pulled itself completely out of the mainframe port. The broken vials remained scattered over the concrete. Their glass caught the light when I looked through the window. The molar-shaped seed vial was gone. I had dropped it on the floor earlier. I knew where it should have been, but I didn't look for it. I closed the door and turned the lock. The bolt slid into place with a heavy metal sound. I checked it once and then kept walking. Something sounded overhead at the end of the corridor. It was a deep mechanical vibration. I took it for another shift in the roots, but the sound kept a steady rhythm. Metal was cutting through ice and rocks somewhere over the mountain. The forward team had reached the glacier. I looked at the clock in the corridor. It was 5:58 in the morning. Terrigen's message had said 6 o'clock. The drilling became louder. Dust shook loose from one of the ceiling vents. They weren't using the main entrance. They had started an independent bore from above. I walked to the entry tunnel. The structural charge panel was built into the wall beside the main stairwell. I put the master key into the slot and turned it. The display lit up. It read, "Confirm collapse. Sequence armed." I left my hand on the key. The seeds couldn't leave the mountain. I turned the key all the way. The display changed. It read, 12 seconds. I stood beside the panel and listened to the drilling above. Then the first charge went off. The explosion traveled through the mountain instead of around it. The floor moved beneath my boots. A section of the access borehole collapsed, followed by the second and third charges farther up the tunnel. Concrete cracked, steel twisted. The stairwell shook as the 2 charges above the B-level door detonated one after another. The mountain groaned. It was louder than the tree had been. The sound filled the entry tunnel and passed through my body. Dust came through every vent seal. It spread in gray clouds across the concrete and covered the panel. I raised one arm over my face and waited. The drilling stopped. More rock shifted above me. The sound continued for several seconds, and then it ended all at once. It was the silence of several thousand tons of permafrost settling into place. The mountain had closed itself around the entrance. I lowered my arm. There was dust on my gloves and across the front of my uniform. I checked the life support panel beside the charge controls. The air system was holding steady. The independent power supply was still running. The thermal core showed enough capacity for approximately 40 years before it would need external service. I read that line twice. It was also not forever. I left the panel and started down. The lower passage was dark except for the emergency lights. I went past C level and B level without stopping. The vault doors stayed closed behind me. Nothing moved in the corridors except the dust drifting through the light. When I reached the black vault, the cavern looked the way I had left it. The tree was still black from the base to the branches above. The outer roots lay across the ice in brittle shapes. Far below the floor, a green pulse moved through the permafrost. It happened once every hour now. The 3 men had moved themselves against the far wall. Elijah was in the middle. The other 2 sat on either side of him with their backs against the stone. They were breathing. Their eyes followed me as I entered. Elijah's face was still and pale. A hardened ring of bark encircled his neck. Green sap ran in a thin line beneath one eye. I stopped several meters away. He watched me. I watched him. Neither of us spoke. The tree had released them, but it hadn't given them back. They were alive and unable to leave. I had burned the thing that held them, and I had also taken its place. I walked to the base of the charred trunk and sat down. The iron shears rested across my knees. Their handles were smooth beneath my gloves, worn down by hands that had used them for a long time. I faced the cavern entrance. The passage behind me was dark, and the door at the far end was the only way in or out. The floor shifted. A narrow root pushed up beside my boot. It was pale where it came through the ice, but the surface darkened as it rose. Another root appeared near my other leg. They moved slowly, without the sudden force they had used in the office. I stayed where I was. The first root curled around my calf. It didn't pierce the fabric or tighten around my leg. The second wrapped around my other leg and reached toward the base of the trunk. More roots came up from the floor and joined them. They grew around me. The wood thickened first. Then the roots hardened into a rough shell that held my legs in place. Calcified growth spread beneath me and rose along the sides of the trunk. It formed a back behind my shoulders and a solid base beneath my weight. The shape was unmistakable. It was a seat made from wood and root and bone. I could still move my hands. I could still lift the shears if I needed to. The structure didn't trap me. It held me upright, facing the entrance. I adjusted the shears across my knees. The green pulse came up through the floor. I felt it through the seat, slow and distant. The roots around my legs remained still after that. I wasn't cold. Above me was a kilometer of rock and ice. Beyond that was the glacier and the dead surface of the island. The ships were somewhere beyond the glacier. I could leave that unanswered for now. Below me was the oldest thing alive. Between them was me, Lloyd Olson, Night Watchman, Svalbard Global Seed Vault. I kept my eyes open. The roots settled around my legs into the shape of a throne made of wood and bone, and I sat in the black beneath the mountain with the iron shears across my knees and watched the door.